My name is Clara Vance, and I am 35 years old. I was standing in the gleaming marble lobby of a luxury beach resort in Naples, Florida. My suitcase handle cold in my palm, while the receptionist politely informed me there was no reservation under my name. A few feet away, my parents were studying the turquoise horizon like they'd never seen salt water before. My older sister didn't look at the ocean. She adjusted her sunglasses, looked me up and down, and said, "We booked suites for me, my husband, and my daughter. We're the actual family." I looked at her. I looked at my parents. Then I said, "Then I'll leave." And I did. I walked out into the muggy coastal heat, flipped my phone to silent, and let their calls accumulate. 6 missed calls by the highway, 20 by the time I pulled into a diner parking lot, and nearly 50 by sunset. Nobody in that air-conditioned lobby, least of all me, saw what was coming. Before the week was through, the oldest man in our family would stand up at his own 85th birthday dinner and utter one quiet, devastating sentence that would bring our entire glittering facade crashing down. And even that wasn't the part that changed my life forever. Welcome back to their secret stories, where quiet people finally get their say and family secrets come home to roost. If you've ever been left off the guest list by the very people who should have reserved your seat, this story is for you. Drop a comment below. Let me know where you're listening from, and be sure to hit that subscribe button. Let me step back for a moment. I run regulatory compliance and trial auditing for a biomedical tech firm in Seattle. 34 senior researchers and analysts report to me. When a new medical device or therapy gets tested on human beings, I am the person who ensures that no one under any circumstances cuts corners. I am exceptionally good at my job. I paid my own way through university, merit scholarships, brutal double shifts at a 24-hour diner, and 5 straight years of canned soup. I verify every statistical variable twice. I read the fine print on everything, including holiday greeting cards. My townhome is 2 mortgage payments away from being completely mine, and every single piece of oak and leather inside it has a paid receipt with my signature on it. That is who I am today. My family, on the other hand, lives in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and they live beautifully. That's the only word I've ever found for it. Beautifully. My sister Evelyn is 38, and her kitchen looks like a double-page spread in an architectural digest. My parents belong to a lakeside country club with valet parking manicured greens. Nobody in my immediate family has what you, or I would recognize as a traditional, bi-weekly paycheck. Yet nobody ever so much as flinches when the bill arrives, and every single year I flew back anyway. Thanksgiving, Easter, every major milestone, birthday. My executive assistant used to ask me why I kept making the trip, and the honest answer was locked away in a hospice room 10 years ago with my grandmother, Margaret. She held my hand while the heart monitor hummed its steady rhythm, making me promise her something I've never repeated out loud until now. I'll get to that promise soon. But for now, here is what you need to understand about me. I kept returning to a dinner table that never quite saved a chair for me, and I convinced myself that this was simply what loyalty required. I was the person who understood. Understanding was my unofficial job title in that household. And unlike my real career, it didn't pay a cent. The hours were toxic. The phone call came in mid-April. My mother Eleanor's voice possessed that bright, hyper, organized shine it always gets when she has an event to stage. "Your grandfather is turning 85 in July, Clara. We're doing an entire week at the Palms Monarch Resort in Naples. The whole family together. Evelyn is managing all the suit allocations." I remember precisely where I was standing, looking out my office window at a ferry crossing Puget Sound, because of what I said next. "Let me just book my own room, Mom. It's cleaner that way. I'll just match your check in dates." "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped lightly. It's all taken care of. Evelyn secured a massive corporate group rate. I am a meticulous woman. Verification is my profession. So I texted Evelyn that exact evening. I asked if my name was on the master reservation list and whether she needed my credit card for the deposit. She replied instantly, "Yep, all set." 2 weeks before the trip, knowing that the week of the 4th of July on the Gulf Coast sells out months in advance, I asked again. Same reply. Everything's locked in, so I rescheduled a critical FDA compliance review that I had guarded on my calendar for 3 months. I booked my cross-country flights. I bought a sundress the soft color of lemon chiffon, a dress I chose specifically because it reminded me of my grandpa Thomas, who ate a slice of lemon meringue pie every single Sunday afternoon of my childhood and always let me eat the crust. I want to be completely transparent here, because fairness is paramount to me. I did everything a prudent, logical person would do. I offered to pay. I confirmed twice. I kept the text messages. If you're listening to this and thinking you would have seen the snare coming, maybe you would have. But the trap wasn't built out of my oversight. It was constructed out of someone else's deliberate design, and it had been quietly under construction since March. Here is something crucial you need to know about my family. Nobody in our house ever discussed finances. Not once. Money was treated like weather from a neighboring county. Someone else's forecast, nothing to do with us directly. And yet, it rained effortless luxury every single day. Evelyn stays home in a 4-bedroom colonial located in a gated neighborhood where the lawns look like they're manicured with manicuring scissors. Her husband, Julian, who is 40, calls himself an independent financial consultant. In 11 years, I have never met a single client of his, never heard a corporate name, never seen the man open a laptop or review a balance sheet. He has deep, loud opinions on Scotch, and he owns a sailboat he perpetually refers to as a restoration project. My father's business card reads asset management, though he hasn't owned an office since I was in middle school. My mother redecorates a room every spring the way other women buy summer sandals. Country club dues. Spy weekends in Scottsdale every February. A brand new luxury SUV parked in Evelyn's driveway every second autumn, predictable as falling leaves. Once, years ago, I sat in my rental car after a tense Thanksgiving dinner and worked out the arithmetic on the back of a parking garage receipt. 2 lavish households. 0 visible revenue streams. I tallied up what that lifestyle actually cost per annum, stared at the final figure, and immediately crumpled the paper. It wasn't my concern, I told myself. Families have private trust structures. Maybe my father's early investments were stroke of genius plays. Maybe Julian consulted for high, net worth ghosts who paid exclusively in untraceable wires. I threw the receipt in a gas station bin and drove back to my hotel. I remember feeling a wave of relief dropping the subject. The way you feel when you archive a case file that doesn't belong on your desk. Keep that crumpled receipt in mind. Keep the underlying question in mind, the one I trained myself for a decade never to ask out loud. Who is actually funding all of this? Because the answer was sitting in a modest, brick ranch-style home in Venice, Florida, 20 minutes down the coast from that pink mega resort, drinking black percolated coffee and missing his late wife. And in July, that answer turned 85. I flew down on the Tuesday before the holiday, Seattle to Fort Myers, 4 hours of an unruly child kicking the back of my seat. I didn't care. I was going to see my grandfather. The Palms Monarch Resort rises above the Naples shoreline like a massive pink wedding cake straight out of 1989. Coral stucco, lined palm trees, and a grand stone fountain in the lobby that hums loudly over the sound of arriving luggage carts. I rolled my suitcase through the glass doors at 2 in the afternoon, wearing my lemon chiffon dress, feeling genuinely optimistic. I spotted my family before they noticed me. They were gathered around the outdoor lounge bar, bathed in fresh tans and effortless entitlement. It was day 1 of the trip, except, as I would quickly discover, it wasn't. They had all flown down on Monday, a full 24 hours earlier, and not a single person had bothered to mention the schedule change to me. My 6-year-old niece, Maya, was the only one who saw me coming. She's the only Vance who runs toward me instead of offering a polite nod. She slammed into my knees like a little linebacker. "Aunt Clara, we saw a wild sea turtle and Daddy swore at the valet." Holding that warm, beach-scented little girl in the Florida afternoon sun, I thought to myself, this is why you make the trip. Then I walked up to the check-in counter to finalize my room before joining them, eager to hang up my dress and apply sunscreen. The desk agent was young, polished, and polite. She typed in my name. She frowned slightly. She typed again, slower this time. The universal cadence of a customer service representative hoping the database will magically correct itself. Then she looked up at me with the most honest face I had seen all day and said, "I'm so sorry, Miss Vance. I don't have a reservation under your name." I did what analytical people always do. I spelled it out clearly. I handed her my passport. I asked her to check under my father's name, Arthur Vance, then under the group block. She located the group block instantly. 4 suites. My parents had a master suite. Evelyn and Julian had a master suite. A 3rd room was registered for Maya, complete with a connecting door. And a 4th room under the block was being utilized, as I would soon learn, to store the family's excess luggage, beach canopy, and specialized double stroller. There was no 5th suite. There had never been a 5th suite. Can I simply pay to add a room to the block? I asked, already pulling out my corporate card, still operating under the assumption that this was a clerical error, a dropped line item easily remediated with credit. Like most administrative headaches, the clerk winced empathetically. "We are entirely at capacity through the holiday weekend, ma'am. I'm so sorry. We have a 50-person waiting list." Behind me, I heard the sound of my family entering the lobby from the pool deck, Maya's flip-flops slapping the polished marble. I turned around, my passport still resting on the granite counter. And here is the precise detail I will remember for the rest of my life. Nobody asked what was wrong. Think about that. You see your daughter, your sister, standing at a front desk with a heavy suitcase while an agent offers profuse apologies, and you do not ask what happened. You don't ask because you already know. Genuine surprise makes a distinct sound. I've heard it in boardroom meetings when clinical trial data unexpectedly fails. That lobby was devoid of it. My father suddenly found an urgent email to review on his phone. My mother began adjusting the strap on Maya's sun hat with laser focus. Julian swirled the melting ice in his cocktail like it held the secret to the universe. The only person who looked directly into my eyes was Evelyn, and Evelyn was smiling. The sharp, satisfied smile of someone watching a long-term strategy pay off. She crossed the marble floor without any rush, her designer sunglasses perched on her blow-dried hair, holding a cocktail adorned with a paper umbrella. My older sister, 38 years old, had been anticipating this exact moment with the same fervor I reserve for major regulatory approvals. "Oh no," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. Was there some kind of mix-up? "There's no room booked for me, Evelyn." She took a slow sip of her drink, then delivered the line, each word deliberate, placed like sterling silver at a formal dinner table. "Well, we reserved suites for me, my husband, and my child. We're the actual family." The lobby fountain continued its steady trickle. Across the room, a bellhop pushed a gold cart stacked with someone else's luggage, someone whose family had counted them when booking. I turned my eyes to my mother. "Evelyn, sweetie," Mom began, and I watched the sentence instantly wither and die right there in her mouth. That was her grand intervention. "Half a name, followed by cowardice. My father never raised his eyes from his screen, and his silence echoed louder than a shouting match across that marble lobby. I have spent my professional life studying how individuals behave under sudden pressure. There is always a precise second where everyone reveals what they truly are. This was that second, and every single person in my family made their choice. So I made mine. I squared my shoulders, gripped the handle of my suitcase, and looked my sister dead in the eyes without letting my voice waver by a single fraction of a decibel. Then I'll leave. That was all I said. Evelyn blinked. She had spent months rehearsing for tears, or a hysterical scene, or a dramatic shouting match she could later weaponize over brunch. I had handed her absolute air. I turned on my heel, walked past the fountain, stepped through the revolving glass door, and walked out into the suffocating coastal heat. Behind me, just before the glass sealed shut, I heard Maya's innocent voice ask, "Where is Aunt Clara going?" Nobody prepares you for the drive you take after your own family formally declares what you are worth to them. I pointed my rental car south along Gulf Shore Boulevard, rolling the windows all the way down because I needed raw wind noise to drown out the silence in my own head. The phone started buzzing before I even cleared the resort's palm-lined perimeter. Mom, Evelyn, Dad, who hasn't dialed my number unprompted since my college graduation. Mom again. By the time I hit the first red light, there were 6 missed calls. By the time I crossed the causeway toward the outer strip, 17. I let the phone vibrate uselessly in the cup holder like a trapped insect. Around 5 o'clock, I pulled into the gravel lot of a roadside motel that looked like a relic from the mid-century era. White cinder block walls, turquoise doors, and a neon sign featuring a diving pelican. The Driftwood Lodge. The neon vacancy. Sign buzzed quietly in the late afternoon haze. The owner was a woman in her 70s with reading glasses dangling from a silver chain and a half-finished crossword puzzle on her counter. Yes. $40. $8 a night. She sounded almost apologetic about the price. Holiday rates, she explained gently. She processed my own card with my own name embossed on the front, and slid a heavy brass key across the laminate counter. A real, physical key, stamped with the number 9. It felt like the only authentic exchange I had experienced all day. Room 9 smelled faintly of salt air and lemon cleaner. It featured a floral bedspread that sagged slightly in the center, a window air conditioner that hummed like an old outboard motor, and a concrete balcony barely larger than an ironing board that offered an unobstructed view of the Gulf waters. I sat on a plastic chair on that tiny balcony and watched the water shift from light teal to deep molten gold while my phone counter climbed to 23 missed calls. At 6 o'clock, I finally played my mother's initial voicemail. A cold, sharp wire tightened in my chest. There was no apology in her voice, not a shred of regret. Just her tense, vent manager voice stretched thin with irritation. "Clara, call us back immediately before dinner. It's important. Before dinner." Why was dinner the deadline? I sat there with a cold bottle of tea from a gas station and listened to the rest of the messages, one after another, like a legal deposition. Voicemail 3, "Clara, this is becoming extremely embarrassing for everyone involved." Embarrassing for everyone. Voicemail 5, my mother, her voice higher, sharper. "Sweetheart, we can easily smooth this over. The hotel can bring in a roll-away bed. Evelyn says Maya's room has a small daybed you can use." A daybed in the 6-year-old's room. Voicemail 8 was my father. 6 seconds of heavy throat, clearing, followed by, "Call your mother." Evelyn didn't bother to call. Evelyn sent a text message because text messages don't require you to fake a human tone of voice. "Stop being so dramatic. Come back here before you ruin this whole trip." I read that message 3 times. Ruin this whole trip. Not "I am so sorry." Not "there was a terrible administrative error." ruin this, as though there were some fragile, precious performance taking place, and I was threatening to pull down the curtain simply by refusing to sleep on a child's daybed like an unwanted charity case. By dusk, the missed call counter on my phone read 47. And I want you to sit with that number for a moment, the way I had to sit with it on that balcony. Because 47 is an unnatural number. People do not dial your phone 47 times in 4 hours to express genuine remorse. Regret has no ticking clock. Apologies can wait until the morning sun rises. Apologies usually do. People dial your phone 47 frantically urgent times only when a structure they rely on is suddenly catching fire and the blaze is operating on a strict schedule. Every single voicemail revolved around the exact same panic. Come back tonight. Be seated at the table for dinner. Put on something nice. We'll address the room situation later. Just be in that chair. Not a single message contained the word sorry. And not a single message explained why my presence at dinner tonight was so desperately required. As the coastal sky shifted from deep purple to indigo, I did something I hadn't allowed myself to do in years. I audited the family archives. Christmas 6 years ago. I was 29. My flight out of Seattle was delayed by a massive winter storm. I texted updates every 30 minutes like a responsible adult. When I finally dragged my luggage into my parents' living room late that evening, the annual family portrait had already been taken. Professional photographer. Matching cashmere sweaters, everyone positioned perfectly by the roaring fireplace. Nobody had bothered to mention a photographer was coming. We'll just have him edit you in later, Julian had remarked, not even glancing up from his drink. They never edited me in. That framed photograph hung above my parents' mantelpiece in Grand Rapids for years. 11 radiant family members and zero trace of me. And every holiday since, I hung my winter coat directly beneath it and said absolutely nothing. Or my cousin's wedding 4 years ago. I flew in straight from a red-eye flight out of Denver, gift box in hand. When I reached the reception, I found my place card assigned to table 9. A table placed directly against the noisy kitchen swing doors, seated beside a hospice chaplain and the DJ's assistant. Evelyn, Julian, and my parents were seated at table 1, directly beneath the crystal chandelier. The Corvance family needed to sit together as a unified block. My mother had explained softly afterward, as if instructing a child on basic social etiquette. And sitting on that $48 motel balcony, watching pelicans fly low over the waves, the awful truth finally crystallized. Every single time they had excluded me, I had acted as their volunteer translator. Flight delays, catering software bugs, hotel mix-ups. I had become fluent in converting their casual cruelty into harmless logistics, translating malice into bad weather. It was the unpaid family job nobody ever thanked me for, the interpreter. And the revelation that night wasn't that they had finally pushed things too far. The resort lobby was simply the same old sentence they had always whispered, spoken out loud for the first time. The difference wasn't them. The difference was me. Somewhere between the hotel fountain and room 9, the interpreter had handed in her resignation. And nobody, least of all myself, knew who I was going to be without that role. At 8 o'clock sharp, my phone screen lit up once more. This time, the caller ID read Grandpa Thomas. I answered before the second chime, Clara. My grandfather has a voice like a heavy oak plank, slow, perfectly level, smoothed down by 5 years of Midwestern winters and decades of running commercial job sites. Why, Grandpa, happy birthday week. A long silence stretched across the line, long even for a man of few words like him. I did a foolish thing this evening, he said quietly. Wanted to surprise the lot of you. I rang down to the resort desk and asked them to send a personal lemon meringue pie up to every Vance suite in the building. One for your folks, one for Evelyn and Julian, even a small cream pie for little Maya's room. I closed my eyes in the dark. I could see the entire disaster unfolding before he even finished the sentence. The girl at the desk was very polite. He continued, his tone as precise as a carpenter's level. Read me the exact manifest. 4 suites. I made her read it to me twice, Clara, because I assumed my hearing aids were failing me. No room under your name. My granddaughter. The one who traveled the farthest. The tide splashed softly against the sand below my balcony. Tell me why my granddaughter isn't staying at the resort. Clara, and there it was. The entire family dynamic in one hand, the cold reality in the other, and 85 years of an old man's dignity caught in the middle. Because make no mistake, this was what those 47 frantic phone calls had been about. Not my comfort, not my feelings. Him. He was arriving at the resort tomorrow for his milestone birthday week, and the family picture had a massive hole punched through it. Their entire desperate campaign had been an attempt to patch the hole with a daybid before the man paying attention noticed the tear. He had noticed. He had noticed because of a pie. Grandpa. I began, then paused, understanding that whatever words I chose next could never be retracted. Let me pause right here narrative-wise. If you have ever held a phone in your hand, wrestling with whether to continue protecting the people who refuse to protect you, tell me in the comments below what choice you made. I read every single one. And if this story is hitting close to home, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what my grandfather did next was something nobody in my family could have predicted. I made a conscious decision on that small motel balcony that I was finished playing the interpreter, but I refused to play the bitter prosecutor either. He had asked a direct question. He deserved the facts, unvarnished and unedited. There was no room reserved for me, Grandpa, I said plainly. Evelyn handled the master block back in the spring. When I asked the clerk at check-in today, Evelyn told me the suites were booked exclusively for her, Julian, and Maya. She told me they were the actual family. So I left. I am staying at a clean little motel down the coast. I am completely safe, Grandpa. I promise you I am fine, no emotional exaggeration, no 20-year list of grievances, just raw data, delivered the exact way I present a clinical compliance audit to a board of directors. The silence on the line was so prolonged I checked the screen to ensure the call hadn't dropped. When he finally spoke, his voice hadn't raised in volume. It had dropped an octave, which, with my grandfather, was the absolute danger zone. She said that. The actual family? Yes, sir. Another long pause. Then he asked a question that completely rewired my understanding of my entire life. Clara, who do you think is paying for that resort? I said nothing, as the invisible napkin math from a decade of Thanksgivings began solving itself in my head at terrifying speed. The suites? My grandfather said quietly. The first-class flights. The private cabana your brother, in-law, is drinking under right now. The formal dinner on Friday night. It's my birthday, Clara. I bought the party. I bought the entire week. He let that sentence hang in the night air like smoke. The actual family. He repeated, his tone completely flat, like a contractor reading a structural failure off an inspection report. Send me the address of your motel. Do not inform anyone that we spoke. The line went dead. I sat there in the darkness, holding the phone, possessing the first piece of an answer to a question I had spent my entire adult life trying not to ask. At 9 o'clock, a pair of headlights swept across the cinder block facade of the Driftwood Lodge. A 2008 Lincoln Town car, the color of slate, rolled to a quiet halt beneath the neon Pelican sign. My grandfather stepped out slowly, moving with the deliberate caution of an 85-year-old frame. He wore a crisp, button-dress shirt buttoned, straight to the collar despite the muggy 90-degree evening. He stood still for a moment, examining the establishment, the cinder blocks, the buzzing neon sign, the turquoise doors. I walked down the exterior iron staircase. He watched me the entire way. He didn't offer a hug, that was never his currency. He looked at me the way he used to inspect load-bearing beams on a construction site, checking for structural cracks, and then gave me a firm nod toward 2 plastic lawn chairs set outside my room. We sat down. He said nothing for several minutes, letting the ocean sound fill the air. Finally, he spoke. "Don't sugarcoat it for me, Clara. I've had a belly full of sugar. Give it to me straight." So I gave it to him straight. The April phone call where Mom insisted Evelyn had everything handled. The text from Evelyn promising everything was locked in. The audit meeting I rescheduled. The clerk typing slower and slower. The 4 suites and the stroller closet. The frosting-coated voice. We're the actual family, my 3-word exit. I kept my voice completely measured from start to finish. He listened the way an engineer reads a blueprinted schematic. No interrupting, no visible wincing. Processing every single variable into an unerasable master file behind his eyes. When I finished, his jaw clenched once. Twice, like he was grinding down a piece of iron. Down the beach, early holiday fireworks crackled in the distance and faded. Then my grandfather turned his head, looked at me, and asked a single question that had nothing to do with hotel bookings. "How long?" he asked. "How long has it been like this?" And God forgive me, I couldn't utter a single word. And that absolute silence was the loudest, most devastating answer I had ever delivered in my life. He sat with my silence for a long, heavy time, hands folded over his walking cane, watching the ocean dark. I would have paid any sum of money to spare him what he was feeling in that moment, because I knew that by telling the truth, I had delivered the blow. The old interpreter inside me kept trying to reach for her desk. He stood up at last, his joints cracking softly, and asked to see my room. I unlocked room 9. He took it in with a single, sweeping glance. The sagging mattress, the rattling window unit, the faint water stain on the ceiling, and the heavy brass key resting on the laminate dresser. He walked over, picked up the key, and weighed it in his palm. "You paid for this out of your own account." "I always pay for my own room, Grandpa." The sentence slipped out of me without conscious thought, and the moment it left my mouth, we both felt its immense weight. It was so much larger than a $48 motel room. He nodded slowly, still holding the key. 50 years I built commercial properties for people, Clara, he said softly. You know what I learned? Everyone loves a finished building. Almost nobody wants to pay for the foundation. He set the key down square on the center of the dresser, like a mason laying a cornerstone. That key right there is the most expensive thing anyone bearing my last name owns in this county. And you're the only one who bought hers. He walked to the doorway, stopping at the threshold. Lunch tomorrow. Noon sharp at the resort restaurant. Not for them. For me. Wear that lemon dress you bought. Before I could reply, he was back in the Lincoln. I stood alone in room 9. My heart pounding like a high-stakes clinical audit, staring at a brass key that had just become the most significant object of my existence. At noon the next day, I walked into the main dining pavilion of the Palms Monarch Resort, walking arm in arm with my grandfather. I wore the Lehman chiffon dress. And I had the privilege of watching something truly extraordinary, my family's collective faces performing instantaneous crisis math. Half a second. I clocked it like a laboratory stopwatch. Half a second of total, unadulterated system failure. My mother's mouth opened, completely devoid of script. Evelyn's cocktail glass froze halfway to her lips. Julian instantly adjusted his posture from relaxed conqueror to terrified employee. And then, the theater performance slammed back on like floodlights at a stadium. There she is. My mother practically shrieked, jumping up with open arms, her party voice set to maximum volume. "We were worried sick about you! You just disappeared yesterday. I received a brief hug that consisted entirely of designer perfume and sharp fingernails pressing into my back. Julian shook my hand with the frantic enthusiasm of a politician seeking votes. Evelyn offered an air, kissed 3 inches off my cheek, murmuring, "Such a sweet dress," through teeth clenched so tight they looked painted on. Within 90 seconds, a chair was summoned for me, conjured out of thin air by a frantic waiter. A place setting appeared. Sparkling water was poured. Would I care for the sea bass? "The sea bass is sublime here!" Nobody mentioned the reservation desk. Nobody mentioned the 47 missed calls, or the word actual that had been hanging over my head since yesterday afternoon. The conversation was aggressively restricted to ocean temperatures, golf handicaps, and local sights. Maya showed me a polished seashell she had found, and I sat in the middle of all that performative warmth like a scientist who has successfully isolated a lethal virus under a glass slide. So this is what they look like when they urgently need me visible. I didn't play along, but I didn't sulk either. I answered every polite question with pleasant, concise professionalism, observing the data points. And 1 seat over, my grandfather was doing the exact same thing over his iced tea. Silent, methodical, deadly. 2 auditors sitting at 1 table, except only one of us knew the audit had already been finalized. If you have never watched a quiet, old schoolman dismantle a predatory family structure using nothing more than polite conversation, I hope you never have cause to witness it. It began over dessert, casual as a weather report. "Such a shame about the room mix-up yesterday," Grandpa Thomas remarked to the table at large. "A massive booking like this, Evelyn. You finalized these reservations back in March, didn't you?" A brief pause hung over the table. The resort's internal system clearly dropped Clara's line item. Evelyn said smoothly, her sunglasses resting atop her hair, her frosting voice flawlessly calibrated. "It was an absolute nightmare, honestly. Holiday crowds." Grandpa Thomas said softly, letting the blatant lie sit right there on the white tablecloth in the bright Florida sun for everyone to admire. Then, mild as tap water, "Julian, how is the consulting firm performing?" "Keeping busy." Julian lit up instantly, stepping right into the trap. "Sensational quarter, Thomas!" Major acquisitions on the horizon. Working with a massive logistics conglomerate out of Chicago. "What's the exact name of that firm?" my grandfather asked, his tone warm and curious, and I watched a 40-year-old grown man realize in real time that he had failed to invent a fake company name beforehand. The sentence choked out into silence somewhere above the dessert tray. "Strict non-disclosure agreements," Julian stammered, awkwardly tapping his nose. "Client confidentiality, you know how it is." "Ah," my grandfather said again. Then he turned his gaze to my father. "Country club treating you well, Arthur? Dues went up again this quarter, I hear." My father, who has never once in his life acknowledged a financial statement in my presence, cleared his throat nervously and mumbled that quality facilities require investment, offering a hollow laugh that contained zero joy. Evelyn's fingers had begun frantically twisting her diamond wedding band around and around her finger. For a fleeting second, I felt an emotion toward her that bordered on pity. Then lunch concluded. My grandfather folded his linen napkin neatly, thanked the server, and smiled at the group. Friday evening. My birthday dinner in the private room. Every single one of us. That was all he said. So why did those words drop onto the table like an active court order? On Thursday afternoon, my mother drove down to the Driftwood Lodge. She stood in the open doorway of room 9, clutching her leather handbag against her chest like a body shield. Surveying the cinder, block interior, and sagging bed with an expression she would have denied under oath. She hadn't come to apologize. I knew that before she even crossed the threshold, because her opening line was, "You've made your point?" "Clara." I let the sentence hang in the air without offering a response. She sat gingerly on the edge of the mattress, the way a person sits on a wet park bench, and got straight to her actual agenda. Friday night is your grandfather's 85th birthday. Please, I am begging you, do not cause a scene at dinner. You know how stubborn he gets at his age. He gets strange ideas about people. I looked at her calmly and asked, what actually happened with the reservation in March? Mom. And I watched my mother choose uncomfortable honesty over a lie for the first time in my life, though only because she foolishly believed the truth would recruit me to her side. Evelyn finalized the block in March, Mom said, her voice dropping. She told us you'd probably be tied up with work anyway. You're always working, Clara, and your father and I. She trailed off, then found her justification. We decided it wasn't worth causing a massive fight with Evelyn over a maybe. There it was, complete, unedited, and raw at last. Not a computer glitch. Not a dropped file, a calculated decision made in March, maintained through April, confirmed in June, with my parents' tacit signatures resting invisibly in the margins. Keeping Evelyn happy keeps the peace. That was the foundational law of the house I grew up in, finally spoken aloud in a $48 motel room that smelled of bleach and ocean salt. I already left quietly once this week. Mom, I said softly, I am coming to dinner. She stared at me for a long moment, and an expression crossed her features that might have been sudden fear or perhaps sudden respect. Before vanishing entirely at the door, she paused. Wear something elegant, she added, unable to help herself. Please, some people only know one song, no matter how the lyrics change. Thursday evening, my grandfather picked me up in the Lincoln, and we walked along the damp sand at the tide line, carrying our shoes in our hands just like we used to 30 years ago. He spoke about my late grandmother, Margaret, how she used to keep score during their evening card games in a little blue spiral notebook, and how she only ever cheated on his birthday so he would win. How, during her final month in the hospital, she spent her energy worrying whether the nurses had received parking validation tokens. Then he stopped walking, faced the dark horizon, and decided to speak the burden he had driven over to share. After Margaret passed, he said, his voice thick, I did all my grieving through my checkbook. Your father was drifting, and Evelyn was always making demands, and it was just so much easier to wire money than to actually look at either of them. Every year, the wires got larger. You know what I told myself, Clara? I told myself I'm helping them. The waves wash gently over our feet. I didn't build a family, Clara, he said, his voice breaking slightly. I'd bought one. I have heard my grandfather speak with anger perhaps twice in my life. This was immeasurably worse. This was an expert builder looking at his own cracked foundation. It was then that I told him about the hospital room 10 years ago. The promise I had kept locked in my chest. Grandmother Margaret's paper, thin hand gripping mine. Promise me you'll keep showing up for this family. My grandfather listened, then shook his head with profound sadness. Margaret said the family, he whispered. She never meant the theater production. I stood there in the surf, shoes dangling from my fingers, as that single sentence completely reordered 10 years of my life. He squeezed my shoulder, turned back toward the car, and called over his shoulder. Tomorrow night, I give my birthday address. I've been drafting it for 30 years. The private dining pavilion at the Palms Monarch Resort featured pristine white tablecloths, floor-to-ceiling glass windows reflecting a crimson sunset, and a slideshow projection my mother had produced looping silently on a screen beside the birthday cake. I stood in the corner with a glass of mineral water and watched 60 odd family photographs rotate by. I appeared in precisely 2 of them. One was my university graduation. Even in that photo, I was positioned at the far left edge of the frame, half-cropped, like an unexpected guest who had wandered into the shot. Nobody else in the room seemed to notice, which was, of course, the defining rule of my entire life within that family. Dinner consisted of grilled sea bass and lavish compliments. Julian stood up halfway through the meal to toast. The greatest patriarch a family could ever ask for, his voice catching with artificial emotion that toggled on and off like a light switch. And then, right as the waitstaff prepared to serve the birthday cake, my grandfather stood up. He did not raise his glass. "Sit down, Julian," he said quietly. Julian instantly sat down. "I am 85 years old today," my grandfather began, standing tall at the head of the long table. "I have been a wealthy man for 40 of those years, and I have been an absolute fool for about 10 of them. Tonight, those two realities stopped living under the same roof. Absolute, total silence descended upon the private dining room. Even the projector fan seemed to quiet down. And then my grandfather began reading line items from memory, his tone as flat and devastating as an auditor presenting an insolvency report. "Arthur, Eleanor, I paid off the remaining principal on your mortgage the year Maya was born. I pay your country club dues, $12,000 a year. I wire $10,000 to your primary account on the first of every month, like clockwork." My father went the exact shade of the white cloth before him. "Evelyn, Julian," my grandfather continued, turning his gaze. "The 60% down payment on your colonial came directly out of my liquid accounts. $8,000 a month. That is the consulting retainer, Julian. There is no logistics client in Chicago. There never was." Julian looked as though he might physically throw up. And this week, these luxury suites, those first-class tickets, that private cabana, this sea bass, that cake, all paid for by my accounts. He scanned the faces around the table one by one. Then he looked at Evelyn, his voice dropping to a level that was terrifying in its stillness. "You informed my granddaughter on Tuesday that she wasn't part of the actual family. You were far more accurate than you realized, Evelyn. None of this was an actual family. I purchased every single piece of it." Nobody moved. Outside the glass, the sunset turned deep purple over the gulf. My grandfather stood at the head of that table with 50 years of unspoken accounting finally laid bare. And he wasn't done. He picked up his water glass, held it for a second, set it back down, and delivered the sentence. "A's of the first of next month. Every single transfer stops, permanently." The words didn't sound like a statement. They sounded like a mountain splitting in half. The wires, the club memberships, the credit lines, the property subsidies. All of it erased. "I am 85 years old," he continued into the suffocating silence. "And this week, standing in that resort lobby, I finally got an accurate look at what my wealth had created. A resort block with no room in it for the only person in this family who ever bothered to pay her own way." My mother let out a strangled gasp. Julian stammered, "Thomas, please, let's be reasonable." My grandfather simply looked at Julian. Just looked at him. And Julian's voice instantly withered away into nothingness. It was Evelyn who completely shattered. Evelyn, whose entire identity, lifestyle, and social status had just been read aloud like an itemized bankruptcy filing. Real tears, tears devoid of polish or vanity, flooded down her face, ruining her makeup. I had never seen genuine tears on her before. They were ugly, panicked things. And then, backed into a corner, she reached for the oldest weapon in her inventory. She whipped her head around and glared directly at me. "You did this!" she screamed, her voice cracking, shaking with fury. "You've been engineering this whole thing! You with your cheap little motel and your pathetic, wounded face. You did this to us!" My grandfather stepped forward. "Clara." The entire room turned to look at me. My grandfather was staring straight into my eyes, both of his hands resting flat on the white tablecloth. "Did I get any of this wrong, Clara?" he asked in front of all of them. "You know these people better than anyone. You've been covering for them your entire adult life. Tell me if I got a single variable wrong. And there it was. The ultimate job opening. The interpreter immediate availability. 35 years of muscle memory. 35 years of, it's fine. 8 was just a misunderstanding. They didn't mean it that way. Rose up in my throat like bile. I looked at my mother's terrified, pleading eyes. I looked at my sister's tear-streaked face, and then I looked at my grandfather. No, Grandpa, I said clearly. You didn't get a single thing wrong. I want to be completely honest about what happened in that room afterward. If you came here looking for a triumphant movie moment, I don't have one for you. It felt like the immediate aftermath of a high-speed collision. That ringing, silent shock where everyone is desperately checking if they are still intact. My father stood up too quickly, his voice swinging from shock to raw desperation within a single breath. Dade, listen to me! We have financial obligations! Real-world commitments? You could hear the precise second his pride evaporated and his bills took over. Julian kept repeating, okay, we can fix this. To no one in particular, his hands hovering in mid-air like a man trying to calm an invisible dog. My mother wept silently, hiding her face in her hands. And little Maya, was standing near the projection screen, holding her ocean shell, watching her mother hysterically sob. That was the only detail of the entire night that cut through my chest like a knife. A compassionate waitress quietly knelt down beside Maya and guided her out toward the resort's aquarium lounge. I didn't gloat. I want that explicitly on the record. There was no petty satisfaction in my heart, no internal scoreboard lighting up. There was only a profound, heavy sorrow, like standing inside a house you grew up in on the day the moving trucks empty it out forever. My grandfather picked up the silver cake knife, looked at the untouched birthday cake, and placed the knife back down. Happy birthday to me, he said softly to the empty air. Then he offered me his arm, and together we walked out of the pavilion, past the looping slideshow that was still projecting images of a family that didn't exist. In the Lincoln. Driving through the coastal night, he stared silently through the windshield for a long time. Next month. I'm restructuring everything, he said finally. Legal trusts, primary estates. I'll need you at the table one more time, Clara. Okay, Grandpa, I replied. I said okay because you do not say no to that man. But I had no concept of what I was actually agreeing to. I flew back to Seattle that Sunday, and the siege initiated on Monday morning. Understand this. For 20 years, my phone had rarely rung with calls from my family. Now it wouldn't stop vibrating. My father called 3 times in the first week alone. My father, who I assumed had forgotten my cell number, opened every call with 5 minutes of artificial weather chat before attempting the pivot. Have you spoken with your grandfather? He respects your opinion, Clara. He'll listen to you. My Aunt Peg was recruited to leave long, rambling voicemails about how family is family, a phrase that loses meaning every single time it is uttered. My mother pivoted to care packages of emotional blackmail, mailing physical prints of Maya at her swimming lessons with notes reading. She keeps asking when Aunt Clara is visiting. Not a single message across 3 relentless weeks asked how I was doing. Not one asked how I felt sitting alone at that front desk, or staying in room 9, or standing in that private dining room while my sister screamed in my face. Every single arrow was feathers down, flying in the exact same direction. Soften Thomas. Fix the estate. Save us, Clara. It was the interpreter position again. Same desk, higher stakes. And the clients were utterly desperate. Meanwhile, the economic reality collapsed right on schedule. My father's country club card was declined at a business luncheon in front of his peers. Evelyn's Colonial was quietly listed on the market. Julian's leased luxury vehicle was turned back into the dealership. And late one night, sitting alone in my paid-off Seattle kitchen, I finally broke down and cried. Not for the money, and not for them, strictly speaking. I cried for the family I had spent 35 years believing was just one more good deed away from loving me. That family, it turned out, had never existed. I was mourning a ghost that had never been born. Let me pause again and ask you a real question. From my kitchen table in Seattle to wherever you are listening right now, if the people who deliberately left you off the list suddenly needed you to get them back on it, would you pick up the phone? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to know your perspective. Because what my grandfather asked me to do next was heavier than anything my sister had ever said in that resort lobby. 3 weeks and 2 days after the birthday dinner, my sister appeared in the lobby of my office building in Seattle. I almost walked right past her. Evelyn, stripped of her curated polish, was an entirely different human being. Her hair was pulled back in a plain elastic band, she wore a rumpled rain jacket, and her eyes carried genuine exhaustion. She had bought a basic economy ticket on her own credit card to fly across the country to see me. That detail alone told me her world had ended. We sat on a bench near the building elevators, and for the first time in 20 years, my sister spoke absolute truth to me. The Colonial was under contract for a short sale. Julian was frantically submitting resumes for entry-level sales positions, a reality she described like a terminal diagnosis. Maya's private school had placed them on a tuition payment plan. And then she stared down at her trembling hands and uttered the raw West sentence I have ever heard from her mouth. I haven't paid a single household bill myself since I was 22 years old, Clara. Not a phone bill, not an insurance premium. I don't know how to survive the way you do. Her voice cracked. And for a fleeting second, I didn't see the 38-year-old woman who had mocked me in a Florida lobby. I saw the 16-year-old girl who used to braid my hair before school while our mother was busy planning social luncheons. Something in my chest softened toward my sister for the first time in months. 1 second of real empathy. Then she reached over, gripped my hand like a corporate negotiator, and delivered her pitch talk to Grandpa. Get him to restore the wires. He'll do it if you ask him, Clara. I swear to you, things will be completely different now. You'll be fully included. Every holiday, every photo, every vacation. You'll be real family. I'll personally ensure it. I sat with that offer in the cold light of the elevator bank. Then I looked at her and said softly, Evelyn, you just offered to sell me the one thing that was supposed to be free. She pulled her hand back, stood up, and walked out through the revolving glass doors without looking back. My phone buzzed before she had even reached the street. Grandpa Thomas. Fly down Saturday, he said without greeting. He was born half a century before preambles were invented. Bring nothing. My attorney, Eugene, has drafted the final documents. I want you sitting across from me when I sign them. What kind of documents, Grandpa? The permanent kind, he said, and hung up. So on Saturday morning, I flew from Seattle to Fort Myers for the second time that summer. On the flight, I did what I do professionally, an exhaustive risk inventory. 1 townhome nearly clear of debt. 1 executive career built brick by brick without a single hand up. 1 family currently in controlled economic demolition. 1 grandfather, 85 years old, possessing a massive fortune, a heavy conscience, and my motel address. I knew what was coming. You do not summon a relative across 4 time zones to witness a document signing unless the document directly involves them. I audit legal executions for a living. I know what a signing ceremony looks like. What I couldn't model was the precise shape of the terms. And that uncertainty triggered a deep, buried part of me that I hated admitting existed. It offered hope. Some ancient, desperate version of myself. The little girl standing beneath the fireplace portrait she wasn't in. Sat in that airplane seat at 30,000 feet, hoping to finally be chosen. And the mature, analytical woman sitting in the same seat watched, that little girl with deep concern. Because I had learned some brutal lessons that summer about what being chosen costs in my family and who ultimately ends up paying the invoice. My grandfather met me at the airport curb in the Lincoln. Good flight? Fine, Grandpa. Good, he said. Let's go rewrite the future. He wasn't smiling. His home in Venice is a modest 900-square-foot brick house built in 1962. He could buy the entire neighborhood with a single phone call. Yet he still lived in the house he bought when my father was in grade school. We sat at the vintage laminate kitchen table, the very table where my grandmother Margaret had taught me to play card games 30 years ago. His estate attorney, a silver-haired gentleman named Eugene, laid out thick manila folders like place settings. Coffee was served in Margaret's old ceramic mugs decorated with cornflowers. Outside the window, an old lawn sprinkler ticked in steady rhythmic circles. And then, in the exact tone he used to order lunch, my grandfather handed me the keys to his entire world. Everything. The net proceeds from 50 years of commercial contracting, the investment portfolios, the real estate holdings, the cash reserves. All of it rolled into an irrevocable master trust, me as the sole trustee, me as the primary beneficiary, effective immediately while he lived, absolute and ironclad when he passed. Your father, your mother, your sister, Julian, if they require financial assistance, they present their petitions to you. Eugene explained, gesturing to the legal codicils. You determine what is legitimate. You decide what gets funded. What gets rents denied. Eugene slid the master folder across the laminate table, turning it to face me. The label tab bore my full legal name, CLRR. VNCE printed in the stark, unyielding typeface of documents that alter lives forever. You are the only person in this bloodline who understands what $1 actually costs. My grandfather said, his eyes fixed on mine. You're the only one who ever bought her own room. So I am giving you the entire hotel. And you will manage it. I want you to understand the terrifying brilliance of that folder. It was the resort lobby completely inverted. It was every skipped photo, every table 9 seating assignment, refunded with massive compound interest. It was my sister standing at my office desk for the rest of her natural life, waiting to see if I would allocate funds for her existence. The little girl inside me reached for the pen with both hands. Chosen. In writing. Notarized. My grandfather watched me with his intense, load-bearing gaze. Eugene uncapped a gold fountain pen and set it beside the document. The sprinkler outside ticked away. Nobody spoke because both men operated under the logical assumption that there was nothing left to consider. I am going to tell you the absolute truth about the next 5 minutes because I promise complete honesty and because I am not entirely proud of my initial instincts. I wanted it. God help me, I wanted it. Not even for the immense wealth, though let's not pretend absolute financial security isn't intoxicating. I wanted the symbolic meaning of it. Safety so absolute you never check a price tag for the rest of your days. And beneath that safety lay a darker, hungrier instinct the scoreboard settled forever. Evelyn would have to speak to me with quiet respect. Evelyn would have to be polite to me. Professionally, carefully polite. Every single Thanksgiving for the rest of her life. My mother would have to submit formal requests for her lifestyle, and I would get to be magnanimous and forgiving about it. I sat at that vintage kitchen table and ran the complete, glorious simulation in my mind. It tasted sweet. And then, because analyzing data to its ultimate conclusion is the only way I know how to navigate the world, I kept running the simulation further down the timeline. Year 2, year 10. My phone buzzing on the 1st of every month. Julian submitting a new business proposal that needed a bridge loan. My mother's voice whimpering. You know how your sister is, Clara, please. Every holiday turning into an estate review meeting. Every gift carrying an underlying financial transaction. Every I love you, arriving with an invoice number attached, the exact same toxic reality my family had always operated under. Except now, I would be the person sitting behind the desk stamping the approvals. I looked down at the folder bearing my name, and I finally saw its true nature. It wasn't a throne. It was a prison cell. It was a bank teller's window with a slightly nicer chair, locking me behind the glass for the rest of my existence as the new manager of their dependency. My grandfather had spent 30 years buying his family, and it had ultimately cost him his family, and here he was, with the absolute best intentions, out of deep love for me, offering to sell me the exact same curse. My hand was resting on the gold pen. That is how close it came. My fingers were actually touching the polished metal, and then, echoing out of the past, I heard my grandfather's own voice from the beach walk. Margaret said the family. She never said the show. I took my hand off the pen and pushed it back toward the center of the table. No, Grandpa. The sprinkler outside ticked twice before anyone in the room drew a breath. Eugene blinked in confusion, looking at my grandfather. My grandfather never broke eye contact with me. No, my grandfather echoed softly. No, to the structure, I said. My voice was completely steady, which astonished even me given the weight of what I was walking away from. You are not wrong that this family needs accountability, I continued, looking my grandfather straight in the eyes. You are wrong about what it would cost me to be the person holding the whip. If I sign those papers, I am no longer your granddaughter. I become their bank manager. They will smile at me the exact same fake, terrified way they smiled at you for 30 years. Did you enjoy that, Grandpa? Did you enjoy 40 years of paid obedience? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. So here is what we are going to do instead, I said, turning to Eugene. May I have your legal pad, please? And sitting at my late grandmother's kitchen table, at 35 years old, I drafted my own inheritance and gave every single cent of it away. First, I dictated as Eugene began writing rapidly. Strip my name entirely from the master trust and the primary estate. Not $1 comes to me. Not now, not upon passing. This has to be genuine, Grandpa. And it is only genuine if I cannot ever profit from standing up today. Second, establish an irrevocable educational trust for my niece, Maya. University, vocational training, whatever she chooses, managed exclusively by a corporate trust officer at a national bank. No family member, not me, not her parents, can touch the capital or use it as leverage over her. My voice caught slightly on that condition, and I allowed the emotion to exist. Third, a modest, fixed annuity for my parents, enough to ensure comfortable housing and medical care for the rest of their lives. 0 luxury allowances, no club memberships, no discretionary wires. They are your son and daughter, in law, and nobody is going to suffer on the streets. But the theatrical production ends today. I looked back at my grandfather. Fourth, the remaining majority of the estate remains yours to enjoy. You are going to spend it on yourself for once. And whatever remains when you pass will fund an endowment in Grandma Margaret's name, providing full tuition scholarships for university students who are working full-time jobs to pay their own way, students who buy their own rooms. The small kitchen was completely silent. You are voluntarily turning down millions of dollars, Eugene stated, his voice devoid of judgment, simply confirming the reality of the statement. I know precisely what I am turning down, I replied, and to this day, that is the most empowering sentence I have ever uttered, because I could physically feel the weight lifting off me. The scorekeeping, the toxic dynamic, the desperate need for their validation, all of it sliding off the table like sand returning to the sea. I spent my entire youth leaving their tables quietly, I said softly. This time I am staying, but not for their money. For the first authentic relationship this family has ever experienced. My grandfather stared at me for a very long time. Then, Thomas Vance, 80, 5 years old. A man who had built skyscrapers out of steel and concrete, covered his face with both hands, his shoulders shaking silently. I looked down at the cornflowers on my coffee mug, giving him his privacy. Some moments are too sacred to audit. He signed the documents my way. Every single page. And the final action he took before Eugene packed his briefcase was sliding my grandmother's cornflower coffee mug across the laminate table into my hands. "Your inheritance," he whispered. "It sits on my kitchen shelf in Seattle right now. It is worth perhaps $4 at a garage sale. It is the most valuable object I own, second only to a heavy brass key stamped with the number 9. I didn't stay at his house that night, and I certainly didn't visit the Palms Monarch Resort. I drove my rental car down Gulf Shore Boulevard to the Driftwood Lodge. The older owner looked up from her crossword puzzle, recognized me, and smiled warmly. Room 9 was available. It always seems to be available when I visit. I paid for it with my own card. The heavy brass key felt solid in my palm. I sat on that tiny concrete balcony with my feet resting on the iron rail while the coastal waters faded into night. And I finally understood the fundamental truth I had been running from since childhood. I was never left off the family list because I didn't try hard enough. No amount of compliance, no level of professional success, no amount of self-sacrifice was ever going to buy my way into table 1. Because I wasn't being excluded. I was being quarantined. I was the living proof in that family that a person could build a life without using their foundation. And every room I paid for myself was a quiet reminder of everything they couldn't achieve on their own. You cannot allow proof like that at table 1. It ruins the performance. For 20 years, I had been applying for a seat at a table that was toxic to sit at anyway. And that night, on a $48 balcony, I permanently withdrew my application. My phone buzzed one final time on the plastic table beside me. A text from Evelyn. "I hope you're happy with what you've done." I looked at the screen for a moment. Then I turned the phone face down next to the brass key and watched the dark ocean waves roll in. And for the first time in my 35 years, the silence from my family didn't feel like a wound. It felt like freedom. That was 1 year ago. Here is the final accounting. The Colonial in Grand Rapids sold 4 months after the trip. Evelyn, Julian, and Maya now live in a modest rented 2-bedroom apartment on the working-class side of town. Julian secured an entry-level position at a local marina, managing the parts counter. Boats at last, professionally, he earned his very first real paycheck at age 41. Evelyn works as a receptionist at an ophthalmic clinic. I know this because one Tuesday afternoon last spring, my phone lit up with a text image from her number. No text message attached, just a clear photo of her very first weekly paycheck stub. I stared at that image for a long time, at everything it represented, everything it cost, and the immense courage it took for her to send it to me. I texted back 2 words, "frame it." She didn't reply, but she didn't block my number either. And in my family, that isn't nothing. That is a foundational brick. You cannot rebuild an entire life with a single brick, but you certainly cannot rebuild without one. My parents sold their large home and moved into a manageable condo. The monthly annuity arrives on the 1st of every month, exactly enough for a dignified life, exactly as designed. My mother sent me a birthday card in March. Beneath the pre-printed verse, she wrote a single sentence in her own handwriting. "You always were the strong one. Love, Mom." For her, that is as close to a full confession as I will ever receive. I keep the card in a desk drawer. Progress, cataloged accordingly. The grand family dynamic didn't magically transform into a fairy tale, in case you were wondering. At a cousin's wedding late last autumn, the seating chart reflected the old instinct. I was assigned to table 8 near the coat rack. The profound difference was that I ate my meal. shared a lovely conversation with an elderly aunt, danced twice, left at 9 o'clock, and slept 9 peaceful hours in a boutique hotel room booked under my own name. The seating chart isn't my responsibility to solve. It never was. Maya's educational trust sits safely at the bank, growing steadily, waiting for a little girl who will never have to perform or beg for her future. That single document contains 0 emotional strings, 0 performance requirements, bearing my design but free of my vanity. The Margaret Vance Memorial Scholarship awarded its first cohort of working students 6 months ago. My grandfather reads their thank you letters to me over the phone every few weeks, always claiming his eyes are watering because of seasonal allergies. And every Sunday at 4 o'clock sharp, Grandpa Thomas calls my cell phone. We talk about light things. The weather, coastal birds, card games, whether his neighbor is ever going to fix his lawnmower. It is the most valuable 30 minutes of my week because it is the one thing left in my family that nobody, anywhere, is paying for. Last month, I flew back down to Florida and spent a quiet weekend at the Driftwood Lodge. Just myself. The owner saved me the Sunday crossword puzzle. Room 9 was open. I set the brass key on the nightstand beside Grandmother Margaret's cornflower mug. I travel with it now. Go ahead and smile. I sat on that little balcony, watched the tide roll in over the sandbars, and thought about what I would tell you if you were sitting in the empty plastic chair beside me. It is simply this. Your real family, it turns out, consists of whoever is still sitting at the table when nobody is picking up the check. And nobody, no sibling, no toxic seating chart, no resort clerk in Florida can ever lock you out of a life you paid for yourself. That is my story. One missing reservation, one quiet sentence at a birthday dinner, and a brass key I will carry with me for the rest of my days. If someone in your life keeps trying to tell you that you aren't part of the actual family, maybe the most authentic thing you can do is pay for your own room. Lock the door and sleep soundly inside it. If this story reached you at the right moment, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe to their secret stories. Until next time, take care of yourselves and stand firm in your worth.